Hey all, here OS Reviews. You're watching our hands-on review of the Suumsuun H108, a inexpensive sports smartwatch that has continuous heart rate tracking, and it retails at $50, but you can find it for a little bit less if you shop around. In terms of functionality, it has a 1.3-inch color LCD display and a custom UI interface that is a bit more fancy than some previous generic watches we've seen, and at 1.3 inches, the watch is very similar in dimensions to something like the Xiaomi Amazfit Bip, which I think it competes with, except it's a little bit cheaper and functionality is also a little bit less. The screen itself isn't fully touch sensitive, and we'll come back to that in a moment, but it has a fairly good construction quality made out of aluminum as well as glass and rubber. So in terms of the packaging, it's fairly simple. We just have on the back some very basic specs printed, and this is a QR code that you need to scan to download the companion app, which is actually generic and called H-Band. This is an app I've seen on other trackers in the past. But anyways, it has a 200 milliamp hour capacity battery, which will claim to last up to 3 days of use with Bluetooth, and it works with both iOS and Android. In the packaging, aside from the watch itself, which comes in a few different colors, this is the black version, we also have an interesting bookmark from the version from Suumsuun. So it looks like it's cut out with pandas in the background. I can use this for reading. A nice little extra gift. And in here we also have a spare watch strap. That's also a pretty nice extra you don't really see with many of these smartwatches. The one that it comes with, again, is completely black, but you can switch it out using this little screwdriver tool. We also have the charging cradle. So these two little contact points, you basically put the watch down like this, and then you put down the main cover here, and then plug this in. And finally, there's just the quick user manual, which is documented in color and tells you how to, again, change the different watch faces. All right, so here's the watch itself. Let's just start with a very quick size comparison with some other models here. I have the Xiaomi Amazfit Bip here on the right, so you can tell that dimensions are very similar. It's actually a little bit wider, but in terms of thickness, they are very similar. The H108 actually is more hefty because it's constructed out of aluminum compared to plastic on the Xiaomi. So taking a closer look at the construction next, again, it is made out of glass on the front, as well as the solid aluminum unibody. And that's it. There are no additional buttons or keys that you can actually press. There's only one capacitive button on the very bottom that you can see is indicated by a small line, and you can tap on this to wake up the screen manually, or you can use the gesture of flicking your wrist to bring the screen up to life. So even when you are turning the watch on after charging it or turning it off, you need to long press on this button for a few seconds. So let's take a closer look at the menu navigation next. As aforementioned, this thing doesn't have a fully touch-sensitive display, which is surprising considering it is a fairly large screen for a smartwatch, but you have to use this dot to navigate the UI, and it does have a pretty fancy UI at that. This is the animation for the number of steps you completed out of a day, in addition to kind of calories burned, distance walked. You can tap on it once more to look at your continuous heart rate, and it has a graph even that tells you the high and the low throughout the day. And this is the blood pressure measurement, which is really just taking your heart rate and using an algorithm to estimate your blood pressure. And here is a sleep tracking log that tells you deep sleep versus light sleep and number of hours you've slept. And you can set a goal on the app, such as I want to sleep 8 hours today, and if you reach that, then it gives you a sleep quality, also in contrast with the deep versus light sleep duration. There's also no sports, which doesn't actually tell you specific sports like basketball or tennis, swimming, or jogging, but it's the same menu for all sports. Essentially, when you begin a sport, it's going to time how long you've been performing that activity, and it's going to always have the heart rate monitor on, so you can track your continuous heart rate throughout the entire sports session, in addition to number of steps. So it's a pretty precise mode if you want to time yourself for doing a sports activity. Right, so here's the interface of our app called H-Band. It's a generic one, so we've seen it before, but it's pretty straightforward. You can simply pull down to refresh. If you connect it with the watch to sync up the information, you can see number of steps, hours we've slept, as well as a graph of when we were active through particular points in the day, as well as our sleep schedule, kind of what points we were light versus deep sleep, and our continuous heart rate, which it automatically tries to take a measurement every 30 minutes. You can also also change that. And also our average resting heart rate, let's say 76 beats per minute, and the blood pressure data if it was taken using the tracker. I can tap on a particular bar to take a closer look at the sleep quality as well as the points in time. Again, more statistics can be available, a number of times we've actually awoken in the night, and in general, the sleep tracking is actually pretty accurate. It's one of the better ones on a low-cost fitness tracker I've tried, so pretty impressive there. When it comes to steps tracking, I would say that it's not quite as accurate. Sometimes it counts shakes as accidental steps. Right now, I consistently get about 10% more steps on this tracker compared to a device from Xiaomi, for instance. Getting a measurement takes about 10 seconds, so it's also quite fast. We can also tap on the heart rate here to manually begin a measurement. So if I tap on begin, you can see it's 64 beats per minute. The last heart rate was 66. So you can see it's actually continuous and moving along as it's refreshing itself. In terms of running, this is again a specific sport. Now this watch does not have built-in GPS, so if you want to track your location on a map, you have to bring along your smartphone and use the phone's GPS to track that. But otherwise, again, all that information will be synced over to this particular panel. Under settings is where you can change all of your goals. So for instance, 9,000 steps, 8 hours of sleep is my current goal. And if I tap on my device, I can see the battery life remaining, types of notifications I want to push over to the watch, including Facebook, WeChat, Twitter, for instance. We can also find the time on for the display, so you can change how long this display remains on after tapping on it once. And more importantly, we can change things like the brightness. There is a manual adjustment, so there's an ambient light sensor built into the bezels of the watch, but if you don't want to rely on that, you can set it yourself. So this is as bright as the watch goes. So again, not the brightest screen in the world. In outdoor environments, it still will be slightly of a struggle to see because it is quite glossy and prone to glaring. But in indoor environments, shielded a little bit from direct sunlight, it's all right. This is as dim as it goes, so there's not a huge variation in terms of brightness that you can adjust, but you can tweak it ever so slightly. You can also use the watch as kind of a selfie remote for taking images, and how you do that is actually by shaking the watch. So using the accelerometer, it will automatically take an image. Other features accessible on the app include a countdown timer, so let's say 1 minute, and it will begin this session here, and you can hear it kind of vibrating along. Finally, you can change the watch face by tapping on settings of the main interface style, and we have 4 of these loaded by default. So if I tap on style 1, for instance, this is what that looks like. It's a very sporty, it reminds me a bit of the Amazfit P1 and also of the Apple Watch. This is style 2, has a bit more of color in the background, but shows you less information, so it doesn't actually tell you your heart rate and number of steps directly from the menu. Style 3 also looks pretty good. It's an analog style from the outer ring. You can see by the dots what time it is, and there's also the digital time also in the center. Style 4 is another one which has a wallpaper in the background. So you can change the style depending on what you like, and you can find, again, a preference for that. So that's more or less it as far as our hands-on review of the Suumsuun H108 heart rate smartwatch. Again, it's not the most advanced thing in the world. It really can't compete with an Android Wear or a Samsung Galaxy Watch because it's missing a lot of those features. You can't really download additional apps or content, and it doesn't have specific sports tracking for types of activities. But what it does do is bring a very solid construction, an extremely comfortable and lightweight wearing experience just because of how thin it is compared to other Android Wear devices, and a pretty accurate heart rate tracking and sleep tracking functionality. Overall, I do like the menu interface as well, just because I think it's very colorful and animated, and you can see a lot of data such as graphs, which are typically missing from this type of low-cost fitness trackers. So I think that they've worked pretty hard in terms of making the UI feel fresh. So if all you need is something very light to handle notifications, some basic fitness tracking, I think you should be satisfied with this watch. But if you are a sports junkie and you have to have the greatest precision, then there are other models to consider. In addition, up against the Amazfit Bip, I do still think the Bip is a slightly better smartwatch because of its longer battery life and endurance. You can check out more details in the links down below, but for now, that's been our video. Thanks for watching here at OS Reviews. That's been the Suumsuun H108.